Hello, everybody. My name is Brian Ponte. I am one of the Adobe Creative Cloud evangelists here at the University of Arizona, along with my friend Alex, who is helping us in the chat. So today we're going to be talking about an intro to UX and UI design using Adobe XD. So Adobe XD we'll get to what Adobe XD is here. Adobe XD is here in a minute, but I think with UX and UI design, there's a lot to cover. So we're actually going to start with a quick conversation about what about what UX and UI is, what some of the chief differences are from like a definition perspective, and then we'll talk a little bit about how honestly the lines are blurred a little bit. But we're going to go ahead and get cracking here. For those that are just jumping into the workshop, if you go to our support page here, you will find our XD workshop downloads. You can download those if you want to follow along. You do not have to. They're there for you as a resource. But to kind of establish an agenda here, we're going to talk about what is UX UI design, and then we're going to talk about what is Adobe XD. Then we're going to start getting started with some basic prototyping. By looking first at how we design inside of XD. And then we're going to look at using the prototyping workspace, and then we're going to talk about sharing your work. So basically, we're going to go through an entire workflow here. We'll talk about some basic tools, but a lot of what we're using is going to be kind of pre-built so that we can just kind of get in and start using the tools that are there. I will, as we kind of go through, we'll go through interface, and I'll talk about how you can build your own assets and import those in. But just for the sake of, here's how we perform the functions inside of XD. We're going to be using a lot of pre-built assets. And I'll show you how to find additional pre-built assets for your own projects. Does that sound good as far as game plan goes? Thumbs up in the chat, or +1, or whatever you did like. Awesome. All right, we're going to go ahead and get cracking then. Like I said, feel free to ask questions in the chat here. So then there's an additional resources page, but we will start with the lecture part of this workshop. What is UX and UI design? So how many of you guys have heard of these terms before, UX and UI? Few? Awesome. All right, so UX and UI. Ooh, let's see here. All right, so UX and UI design are two different kind of mediums and two different kind of spaces to work in, but they're often lumped together. If you've ever looked at UX and UI design jobs, they're kind of put together and kind of interchanged between each other. But if we were to strip away what all of the lumping that people tend to do, basically, and you can take a look at all these things. There's some awesome resources from Career Foundry. There are links at the bottom, which is where we get a lot of inspiration for this workshop. But basically, UX is user experience, is the user experience. It's basically developing a human-first way to create products and experiences. The term was coined by Don Norman, who's a cognitive science and co-founder of the Nielsen Norman Group of Design and Consulting. And he describes it like this. I really like his description. User experience encompasses all aspects of an end user's interaction with the company, its services, and its products. You could exchange the word company for university or organization or unit or whatever. You'll notice that there is no mention of technology here. How a user or how a person uses uses a service and designing spaces that make it easy for them to use it is something that's been around for forever. It's why most things function the way that they do. It's why this water bottle has this little flippy thing on there. Like, you think about how the user is going to use it. I mean, the best way to kind of get around it, I have this little package here. It has a little tear open strip here to open it up. Like, while that is industrial design and there's product design and all sorts of other things, but thinking about how the user is going to interact with your objects is basically what user experience looks like. But it's a little bit deeper than that. Love these bullet points here for this. So basically what UX and UI design is concerned with is that user experience design and the process is developing, improving the quality of interaction between the user and all facets of a company. So it thinks about how does the user wholeheartedly interact with this company. It also thinks about, in theory, how things are going to be used. And it also concerns itself with what's the feeling that that maybe our target user has. And it involves a whole lot of learning about and investigating who your primary users are, and maybe even who your secondary and tertiary users are, and how they would feel about interacting with an experience, and what are their issues, what are their needs, like what is it that they need to accomplish with what you're doing, and then how can we craft an overall experience that fulfills all of those and leaves that user either happy or satisfied to come back and work again. So it's kind of a holistic approach, and we'll get a little bit deeper to it in a minute, but that's kind of the overarching piece. Like I said, user experience is just about how that user, for lack of a better term, experiences that thing, and how can we design something to get the most out of that experience. Now, if we counter that with a user interface design, user experience, by definition, like I said, in practice, lines are blurred. But by definition is very different from user interface design. So user interface design is strictly a digital pursuit. I mean, if we kind of strip it all back, user interface design starts at the point at which a human and a digital interacts with a digital device or product. UI designers in their purest form are wholly concerned with the interaction, but with making this interaction as intuitive as possible. So basically, like I said, it's a purely digital practice. And in UI design, we're thinking about what do buttons and icons and spacing and typography and colors and responsive design look like, so that they give the user the best experience there. But the UI part is just concerned with how this feels on the screen. Let's see here. And essentially, the idea is that a UI is, the way I tend to think of it, and like there's lots of ways to, UI is kind of the implementation part of UX, although they kind of bounce back and forth and ride together all the way up until the end of a project. There is, I wish I could recall the name, but I saw a really good quote about it. If you think about riding horses, the UX part is all of the tack that's required. So the stirrups, the bit, the bridle, the saddle, and all of that. Like, what does the user need to feel supported by this, and how does all those needs make them feel? And then the UI would be the feeling of riding that horse. So once your emotion, like now that all the pieces are there and we know what the user needs, how can we make that experience feel perfect? So that's kind of the idea, and it does feel kind of like lofty and everywhere, and that's kind of how it sits inside the industry. So let's talk real quick about some of the differences between them based off of kind of the soft skills, hard skills, and transferable skills that you might need to be in one of these two fields. So in UX, the ability to collaborate and communicate and be open-minded, and empathy and curiosity for continuous learning and critical problem solving are all great skills, because in UX, you're going to be doing a whole lot of asking people what their needs are, and talking with them and doing workshops and focus groups and usability testing to learn about what a user's needs are. And then everything that you do there will transfer over into the UI part, because you'll see that there's also empathy and collaboration. So these two teams, if they're teams, talk to each other, and if it's just you, these two things are going to bleed in between each other all the time. Being able to, in UI, being able to adapt to the needs of users as you find them, super helpful. You may notice in apps that you use all the time that there are constant updates, and sometimes they're really great. And often when they're really great, It's the result of getting really good feedback, implementing it, testing it out, and then releasing it, and then reiterating. Really, UX and UI can be an iterative process, and often the best apps are never done. They're constantly modified. As far as hard skills go, learning about your user and learning about analysis techniques is huge for UX. Being able to wireframe and prototype is important in both of those. Understanding how to do usability testing and what the needs are, super important for UX. And then in UI, things like understanding responsive design and how it works, and then understanding how to create animations and interactivity that feel good is a big part of that piece here. But hopefully you can see the main reason why I love this thing is because there's so much bleed over in between the two things. So customer service is in both, research is in both, project management is in both, because you're constantly because you'll constantly be working together if you're two separate units or departments or people in helping getting that up to where it needs to be there. So basically UX and UI kind of ride hand in hand. The UX part tends to lean more towards learning about who our user is and what they need. And the UI part, like in short, is basically the implementation of that. It's how do we synthesize all of that into something that's usable? And that's and those two steps are really important when designing applications. And you don't need to. Well, all of this stuff is great. You can certainly get started making an application or designing a prototype in XD using this stuff, but if you keep this stuff in mind and you do a little bit of research before you start about who your ideal or your regular user might be, what their needs are, where they're at and stuff in life, and really have a human-centered approach to designing this stuff, you will often find that you make better applications that take more into account of what users need and where they are. And with things like speaking to users and doing usability testing, you'll find avenues of how people get to things and how you can modify things to make it easier that you would have never thought of on your own. So it's a really enlightening process. And at the bottom, there's a link that talks all about what these two are if you want to dig deeper. But the reason why I present all of this is I think a lot of these decisions and ideas are the reason why XD was put together. So with that said, let's go ahead and jump into what is Adobe XD. And we'll get into XD in a second, but like physically into it and start moving around. And this is from Adobe's website. Adobe XD is a vector-based tool for designing and prototyping user experiences for web and mobile apps. So that user experiences part I highlight on purpose because it does kind of work inside of both sets of user UX and UI, because we're designing the UI that the user experiences and then testing it with them. So kind of is the folding of those two things, in my opinion. You have things like wireframing, interaction design, prototyping, and more that you can use here. And then XD is kind of broken up into three phases. And you'll notice that there are three workspaces inside of XD: design, prototype, and share. And those are the three sections of our workshop. So with the design section here, we create our elements and we move things around on screen to kind of get them where we want them. And then in the prototype section, that's where we connect everything together so that we can simulate those interactions. And then the share section is where we will do things like set things up for usability testing, should we choose to do that, or share with stakeholders and get feedback, or even share with our developers who would take this prototype and then turn it into, and then would start the process of creating a fully functioning app here. XD is really built to prototype your app and do great proof of concept, allow you to design the elements that are going to be in there, and it's built to be really fast. So the idea is that if you do a lot of this work on the front end, you're saving a lot of time on the back end. You're allowing your application developers to do what they do while you or whoever's using XD focuses on a lot of the basic design elements there. And I'll show you how cool it can be to kind of share all this stuff with your potential developer later. Cool. Making sense so far? We covered a lot of ground. Any questions? More overview stuff, so I don't anticipate there'll be a ton. But there's a quick tour of the interface here. The main reason I put these two up against each other is you'll notice that for the most part, these application panes are kind of the same, which is great for what we're doing. But you can see all the differences between Mac and PC there. And with that being said, we're going to go ahead and jump into Adobe XD. Cool. All right. Go ahead and minimize this real quick. And then if you go to your project files there, let me go ahead and find mine. I think I put them on the desktop there. Cool. We have kind of two folders, this 01 getting started, which is where we're going to get started. Then we're going to go ahead and open this 01 XD design guy right here. Okay, perfect. So as previously stated, how many of us let me ask a question real quick. How many of us have used XD before? Yes, no in the chat. Cool. I have not. Yes. Cool. No. Okay. Perfect. So we got a mix of a lot of things. So I'll say this much: XD changes and is constantly evolving all the time. So it really doesn't matter where your jump off point is. With this, we're going to kind of go through some of the basics of moving around in XD. We do have other workshops on designing more specific function with XD, but we're going to go ahead and get started and kind of walk you through some basics. And for those of you that are brand new, this will be a great kind of primer. For those of you who have been around for a while, hopefully I'll teach you. You'll be able to see a few things that maybe you didn't know existed here. And cool. So we're going to go ahead, and this is what we open when we get started. To zoom in, you can pinch and pull on a trackpad if you have that. You can also hold down, if I use a mouse usually, so I can hold down the Alt key option, the Alt key on Windows, Option on Mac, and then scroll to zoom in and out. You can also go under View, and there's zoom in and zoom out, and then you'll see keyboard shortcuts for everything here. What I will do is I'm going to go ahead and just zoom into this first section here. We're going to create and style an artboard here. So on our left-hand side, we'll have all of these tools. So on the left-hand side, you'll find the select tool. And then you have a square tool for making a rectangle tool for making rectangles, circles, polygons for making multiple polygons and things like that. The pen tool, a lot of basic tools that you find inside of Illustrator live right here. You have the text tool for creating text, but what we're looking for is this Artboard tool. So if I click on the Artboard tool, pay attention to what happens on the right when I do this. So when I click on the Artboard tool, you'll notice that a context-sensitive menu pops up on the right-hand side of your screen. So you can absolutely, with this Artboard tool, click and drag to draw out your artboard here. But because often when we're designing for screens, let's see, I've used Sketch before. Is there any difference? It is a different approach to it, but Sketch does similar things. One of my favorite things about the Adobe applications is their ability to link with other applications. So I can create, let's say that I'm really good in Illustrator and I want to design all of my screens in Illustrator. I can bring all of those in with all of those spaces and have all those interactions. Sketch does very similar things to XD, but I think it's a little bit of a different approach. Good to know. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this guy here to create an artboard. And you'll see that it drops my artboard right there. Where it drops it, I don't want to say it's random, but it tends to be somewhere near the center of the screen. And you'll see right now that it's labeled iPhone 12 Pro Max -1. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and delete that. I can highlight that with it selected, hit delete, go to here, and I want that iPhone X one. There we go. Cool. So now that I'm here, I can click and drag to move this around. And then you'll see these little guides come up here that will help us kind of line things up on our artboards. So I'm going to go ahead and you can move this around. I just want you to kind of click and drag it around to get a feel for how those guides kind of snap. That snapping is all over XD to kind of help you align things properly. Cool. So now what we're going to do, we have our artboard selected. We want to take this art, which is outside the artboard, and move it onto it. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab our selection tool. The keyboard shortcut for that is V. The select tool is kind of an upside down arrow there. So I'm going to click and drag on this to highlight everything inside of it. Okay. And then I'm just going to click and drag this onto our artboard here. Things need to live on an artboard for them to be visible in our final prototypes here. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and drop this. And then you'll see once we do that, it kind of gets cut off here, right? So if I zoom in a little bit, I'm just using the Alt key and scrolling. You can pinch and pull with your trackpad if you're using one of those. If you hold down the space bar, you'll get this little hand tool here. And when you're using any tool, this allows you to pan easily. So I use this space bar quite a bit. So now we'll see this is kind of, we'll see that this is kind of, we have the part that's completely opaque and then some part that's semi-transparent out here. The semi-transparent part is the part of the image that's being cut off. And typically you want a little bit of that bleed there so you can move things around. So I'm just going to click and drag to move this into a place that I like it. And then I can just click away. And then you'll see that this is what my screen is going to look like. Cool. To preview any screen, there's this really cool preview button up here. Desktop preview. Hit that play button there. And then you have to select the artboard first. So make sure that's highlighted. And then hit the play button. And then you will see this preview right here. And then if we had clickable elements, we'd be able to go through and kind of interact with that prototype. We won't do that yet, but that preview button is going to be really important. Cool. Any questions so far? Clicking and dragging, feeling okay? Creating an artboard, feel all right? Cool. All right. So I'm using the Option key or Alt on Windows to kind of zoom out again or pinch and pull. We're going to go ahead and go down to this import content with repeat grid here. So we'll break down how this is kind of built, and then we will use what's called a repeat grid to make a bunch of them. So this was built by importing text and things like that, using the text tool, creating text boxes, selecting fonts and sizes, and creating that. These are logos. You'll notice that there are little lock icons next to those. That means that all of these guys are locked so that they don't move. It's part of the demo for the tutorial, but you can always click on this little loop to unlock them. But this little guy right here, if we click on something once here, and then I have that selected, right? And then on this left-hand side, all the way at the bottom, when you're in the design window here, you will find this layers panel. If we click on layers, the keyboard shortcut is Command Y. We can go ahead and as we click on different elements, you'll see that they get highlighted based off of what we click. So if I click on this, I'll see that this is a group, and I know it's a group because there's a little folder icon here. If I click on this folder, it will drop down and show me the contents of that folder. And you can see that this is 4 or 5 elements kind of grouped into a single one by selecting them all and then right clicking and hitting group that are kind of all put together here. So we're going to duplicate this group. We'll start by, and if you can double click to drill down into the individual elements if you'd like. I'm going to go ahead and click away just to deselect here, and then I'm going to select just the entire group. Cool. So in our context sensitive menu on the right, you will find the repeat grid. So go ahead and Command R is the option for repeat grid. It's pretty cool. It kind of shows you what you can do. You can duplicate and manipulate the contents of a bunch of different instances of the same project using the repeat grid here. In a lot of mobile and web design, you're using a lot of the same style of elements over and over again. We could absolutely copy and paste this 6 times, but it's way easier to do this and it keeps it more uniform. So you'll notice that when I select a repeat grid here, this little blue highlight turns into a green one. And then we can adjust horizontally and vertically. So I'm going to go ahead and click and drag out to create another copy of this horizontally. I'm going to go ahead and click and drag this down to create a total of 6 copies here. Cool. You'll notice you can kind of drag down forever, but I'm going to go ahead and just stop at 6. Cool. So now I have 6 copies of the same thing. Pretty cool. And really, and again, like once you kind of get the hang of it, it's very fast to kind of get this stuff up and running. I'm going to go ahead and use this little, the little pink part that shows up is called a gutter. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust the gutter here just by moving my mouse over until I get that vertical gutter. I'm going to click and drag a little bit to kind of line these up. There isn't a lot of space here, but I'll get kind of close. So that works. Okay. And then I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing for my horizontal gutters here. And you'll see that it'll adjust all of them together. Cool. All right. So far, so good. Awesome. So now we're going to go ahead and add some other elements to this. So if you go into our downloads folder that we have here, under this 01 images and text, we're going to go ahead and take a look at some of the content we have here. You'll see that we have a bunch of chairs. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by replacing all of these individual images of a chair with a bunch of different ones. So you can pick any 6 you like. I'm going to go ahead and go with this guy. I'm just holding down the command key to select 6 individual ones. So they're all selected together. You can absolutely hold shift, click the first one, hold shift, click on the last one. However you want to multi-select inside of your guy here. I happen to be on the thumbnail view if I'm on a Mac, but you can do list or column or whatever you want. So I'm going to go ahead and pick 6, and then I'm going to click and hold. And once I do, I'll see that all 6 are here. And then what I'll do is I highlight, notice that we can go to this bigger part of the group, or we can kind of drill down into the individual image. I really want to go to the individual image here. All I have to do is hover over. And then once I get to this one right here and I let go, we'll see that that populates with all 6 different images, which is super awesome. And is a really, really good, example of how having all of the images that you want together before you start helps this process go faster. You don't have to have that, but if you can amalgamate all of your images together and have them set, you can kind of bring them all in. Cool. So next, we're going to go ahead and add different titles to everything. To do that, there is a share titles.txt here. If you're on a Mac, you can press spacebar to preview it. You'll see it's simply a list of all of the different, a bunch of different names separated by return keys or hard stops. So all I have to do here to replace those names is click and drag and then drop it on the title here. And we'll see that they all change. This is, when I learned this initially, this blew my mind because all I have to do is go in and edit this and then click and drag to reset it. And then the chair price is the same thing. It's just chair prices separated by returns, by the return key and things like that. All I have to do is click and drag this and drop it right there. And then all of those things adjust. So that's how we can kind of create a repeat grid and import content directly into XD. You don't need a repeat grid to import content. If you just wanted to bring in a chair into a blank space, you can simply click and drag it. But that repeat grid really does save time because like I said, a whole lot of times for these elements that we're creating, you'll create it once and then you'll use things like repeat grids to duplicate it over and over again. So you don't have to rebuild from scratch. So far, so good. Any questions? Okay, cool. If they pop up, feel free to put it in the chat and I will do my best to answer them. Sweet. So we're gonna put the cart before the horse here just a little bit. And we are going to take our first look at creating some interactivity inside of XD. So what we're going to do is we have our 2 artboards here. We have this Gantt collection, and then we have this mustard Shiru chair. What we want to do is we want to make it so that when we click on Shiru, it takes us to this page. So a few things to look at before we do that. What we'll want to do here, actually, I'll go ahead and preview this for you. You don't have to do this. If we preview this page, we'll see that it's really long right here. And this is my live preview, right? If I click on this other page and preview it, we'll see that it's significantly shorter. So what we really want to do is we want to make sure that all of our artboards that are going to be seen on a screen, and there are exceptions like overlays and things like that, are typically the same height across all of them. That's why using those artboard presets are great, because if you develop it for a specific height and width, all of your pages can stay that way. But we can also have scrolling. So let's talk about how we do that. So we're going to make this a scrollable page. To do that, we're going to look at the one that's the way that we want it. And then on your properties panel here, we're going to go down to scrolling. It says vertical, and then we have a height of 812. I'm going to go ahead and copy that height. I'm going to paste that height over here. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this first artboard. And then I'm going to go to scrolling, select vertical as my scroll type. And then under viewport height, I'm going to paste or type in that 812. Cool. And then we'll see if I did that right, that there's this little handle here that's kind of midway through the page. And this shows us where our breaking point is. So if I scroll in really tight, you might be able to see this little blue line right here. The little blue line is our viewport window. They call that a viewport. So now that we have that viewport set up, and I'm just using Option to scroll in and out, and spacebar to move around, I'm going to go ahead and select the one that I want, click on play, and there's my preview, right? And then there is my scrolling. Awesome. Cool. And if you want to get really fancy, we won't do this here. But if you'd have your mobile device set up. I have too many text messages on it. But you'd have your mobile device set up and then send that preview to your phone so you can view it in real time as you're working, which is super cool. So you can kind of get live feedback on a device where it might be living. So now that we have that set up, we're going to go ahead and set up our first interaction here. We're going to take this. We want our user to be able to click on the Shiru and then go to this chair. So to do that, we're going to go ahead and switch over from design to prototype. And then we're going to click on the element that we want to be the trigger here. So so if we click on the Shiru right here, it gives us this group, which works for me. So, and then you'll see this little arrow here, right? And it will always be on the right. You'll see there's a little bit of overlap here. But what we're going to do here is we're going to click and drag this to get this handle here. We want to drag this handle to this artboard called Chairs Detail. When I click on that, we'll see that now they're connected. If you actually click away from it, you'll see that it'll be highlighted in gray. Or if you don't click on the page, it won't be highlighted at all. Totally fine. Just click on the title of the page, then click on the little line here to get to that interaction. Okay. Now with this selected in the prototype menu, you might notice that you have a really limited options here. That's because prototyping is all about connecting things. We're not designing here. We can switch back to design at any point. We're not making any live choices here, and you'll often be switching between the two a lot. But we're going to stay in prototype for this. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this line here, and then I want to look at the properties over here. So we have a bunch of different interaction types. If you click on this eye, it will kind of walk you through. They're cute little animations that show you a bunch of different ones. But we're going to go ahead and use tap or click. That's kind of the tap is the normal thing. So we're going to tap. There's also keys and gamepads. So like you can design game interfaces here too, and like use your controllers to manipulate them, which is super cool. You can connect like Xbox and PlayStation controllers to most computers, and it will use those as ways for you to test out inputs. We're going to go ahead and choose the type. You have lots of them. We're going to stick with transition for now because I just wanted to move over to that page. And then our destination is already set here, which is awesome. But if you'd rather kind of choose from a list, that's fine. If you have 100 artboards, that might be really helpful. And then under animation, you have lots of options here. We're going to go and stick with a dissolve, and we're going to keep it really simple. And then duration, you can adjust. 0.3 seconds is kind of normal. Anything after 0.6 seconds can feel like an eternity on a mobile device. So now that we have that set up, we're going to click on the Gantt collection title, then we're going to hit the preview. All right, cool. So if we scroll down here, we'll notice that Shiru is now clickable. So I can click on that, right? And that's great. What if I wanted to get out of Shiru and go back to the main menu? I can't because I didn't set up that interaction here. In previous versions of XD, you used to have to close this preview window, but the cool thing is that this is a live preview window on the current version of XD. So if we make changes, we can test them out right away. So if you're working on an individual thing, it may be worth leaving this up a lot of the time. So to set up this interaction back, we're going to find the element that we want to use. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in here a little bit so it's a little bit easier. This X makes sense to me. We're going to go ahead and click on the X here to select it. And then we could just drag it back and that would work. But if we referenced this page on 5 different pages, it would be really, there's not an easy way to have this kind of go to 5 different pages. Because, you know, on most websites you have like, what if this was in your, after you viewed something else in your recommended search feed or something like that. So what I prefer to do with any sort of X or return to previous screen thing is set up an action that returns us to whatever the previous screen was. So if I click on this once, I get this little loop. And then I'll go to my interactions here. And then under trigger, it's still going to be tap, but the action is going to be previous artboard. So wherever I came from, regardless of where it is, it'll go back to whatever the last thing I clicked is. So I can test that out kind of in real time. Now that that's set up, click on that X, click on Shiru, click on that X, we can go back and forth. And if I wanted to test what a different transition would look like, I can come here, click on this, then go to different transition, our animation. Let's say I want it to, I kind of like the one that we have, but let's say that we want it to slide right. And click on that. It'll slide right. And then when I hit X, it will slide left. So it will do the opposite interaction to come back. So XD tries really hard to help you. And it will also remember the last interaction you did, which is kind of cool. Kind of neat, right? What questions do we have so far? Feeling okay? So we've really kind of talked about, yeah, it is. I'm glad you think so. It is really cool. And there's tons you can do. But I want to kind of show you that. And that's kind of those are the reasons why we would switch between the design modes and the prototype modes. I want to show you one more thing in the design mode, in the design document. And then for the sake of time, we're going to go ahead and move on to prototyping. The good news is we've already done the first thing in prototyping here. Okay. So typically when you start a project, I know there's no number next to it. We're going to go to this, this next thing here. When you start a project here, I would say that there's a lot of work that went into building the content that's here, picking the fonts and picking all that stuff. And over here, you can see a typography guide, a color guide, an icon guide. If you're doing this professionally, these are really helpful. They give you the right colors and things like that that you want to use in all of these icons here, which is great. And by the way, like these are available for you to use. So if these make sense for what you're doing, feel free to use them in your own projects. You can have multiple XD windows open. But this is all built. And what I want to do here is I want to kind of save this as I want to kind of save this as something that we can reference as we build new pages. So what we'll do, we're in the layers panel right now. If you've been following me the entire time, we're going to go ahead and switch to the libraries panel. And then what we want to do here with this page selected is we want to add a bunch of elements to our libraries here. You see that we have some components, but what I'm looking for is colors and character styles. So if I click on the plus button here with this page selected, it will take all of the colors that are associated with it and then make them colors that are going to be available to us regardless of where we are in the document. This is awesome. So that you don't have to remember what colors you chose previously. It basically does the job of this color section. Although if you were designing, you would still want this available to you somewhere in the document. We can also do that for any character styles we have. So all the different fonts and sizes and things like that that we have, we can click this plus button to take everything on the page and make it an individual character style. So the beauty behind this, I'm going to go ahead and zoom in here and kind of show you, is that once this is set up, it's really easy to make changes to. So you'll see over here that I have kind of 3 oranges. I'm kind of wrestling between like which one I like the best. If you see that if I click on it, it will kind of impose that orange everywhere, which is not what we want. But if I right click, I can do this thing called highlight on canvas. So I can see with this little blue bounding box, what is that, what's been that color orange here, right? And I knew that it was that, but let's say that I really like this darker orange and I want to try it out. And in fact, I know I like this orange and I'd rather just replace it with that orange. So let's go ahead and we'll right click here. And we're going to copy this hex code here. And that's the color code there for it. Then we're going to right click here. And then we're going to edit this hex code. And you'll see that you have hex RGB or HSB. Hex is what the default is because we're working on screens. And I can paste this here. And you'll notice there's a really subtle shift in the orange, but once we kind of get that done, now this is that darker orange. You'll see that it wasn't that significant of a change, but it's enough for me. If I wanted to kind of make this wilder, I could edit this into like a pink and hit OK. Cool. Oh, and this layer is locked, which is why we can't see anything change. But the idea is that you can have all of your colors there for you. If you were working with character styles, let's click on the page. Yeah. Let me click on this twirl down here. Cool. You can also see any instances of any fonts that you have too. So you can highlight them on canvas and we'll see that all these fonts are just for these titles here. So you can kind of put them all together so that they're all available to you across any part of your artboard, which is pretty cool. That making sense so far? Just more organizational tools that will help you as you're working to create new pages and things like that. And then last thing I'll say here before we move on to the prototyping part is if you have a page that you like and you want to use, let's say that it was this page, right? Because maybe you're going to do one for like 5 different collections of things that you have. We're not going to add all the elements here because we've already talked a little bit about that, but I want to show you a quick way to duplicate your pages. Lots of ways to do it. Under edit, there's this duplicate button. Command D will duplicate. It'll create a copy over here for you, which is fine. You'll definitely want to rename it because it just keeps the name and then adds a 1 to it. The way that I prefer to do it, just because it's, in my opinion, it's a little bit easier. If you hold down the Option or Alt key, and this works for anything inside of XD, but we're going to be using it for an artboard. We can hold down the Alt key, then click and drag to create a copy here. And that will allow us to duplicate a page so that we can kind of manipulate it and change it to be whatever we want. We probably rename this to, I call this the Brian collection, because that's my name. Then we can come in here. And then these are locked, so I'll have to unlock it. Cool. Making sense. And then you can go through and manipulate all of these different things, use any of those techniques we talked about, like selecting multiple objects and bringing them in to kind of change all of this stuff on the fly and have multiple pages. Cool. Making sense so far? So that's kind of the basics of designing stuff inside of XD. We're going to go ahead and move into some prototyping. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and go to the files that we shared earlier. And then we're going to go to under 02 prototyping, this Adobe XD prototype. Because prototyping is really, designing is really cool. I like it a lot. You notice I can have multiple XD windows open. So I can take content from one and then move it into the other just with a click and a drag, which is cool. But really, in my opinion, where the rubber hits the road is in the prototyping. That's how we can connect everything together and we get the interactions that bring this stuff to life. So we already talked about it real quick, but just to recap, wiring artboards. We want to be in the prototype space to do it. To connect things together, we're going to select this. We're going to select what we want to use as the interactable. So this whole entire group is fine. I'm going to click and drag it over here to connect it. Okay, so there is our guy here. We can start a live preview by selecting where we want to start and hitting this to do that. And then we see that this is a selectable, but we can't go back because we don't have this interaction set up to return. So again, we click on this X here, click on this arrow. If we click and drag, it allows us to connect stuff, but I want it to be able to kind of redirect us regardless of where we came from. So I'm going to click on this and then move this over just a little bit. My apologies here. Make that a little bit bigger. Cool. And then we're going to choose our type is previous artboard. So whatever we set up for the first one, it will do for the next one. So that's live, which is awesome. So we can kind of test it out as we're working. And this ability to test it out as you're working, just have this side by side here is great. I have a big 27-inch monitor here. So I do have some advantages, but if you had a second monitor or if you had some vertical space, you'll see it's not a ton. It would be worth kind of looking at your setup and seeing how you can do that. You don't have to have it up all the time, but it can be really handy. So, anywho, there is that one. Any questions on that? I know that was a really quick recap of what we just did. But basically, we're going to use that functionality of connecting and rigging things together to do way fancier stuff. Cool. Okay. So next up is auto-animating to create kind of micro interactions here. And keep in mind, like if this were like an actual prototype, these would kind of all be offshoots and kind of be treed out. They can be visually any way you want, but these will all kind of connect together if this were like a really big prototype we were using. So we're going to start by creating some auto-animate transitions. If you've never used auto-animate before, and auto-animate is an action option here, the requirements for auto-animate is that everything that you want to animate in between needs to be in all of the pages you want to use. I'll show you what I mean by that. So here, if we want to auto-animate this, for example, you'll see right here that everything that we have here, this discover, learn, and explore has all been kind of pre-made and is in all three of these elements here. And these were just duplicated. And then this learn section was kind of changed for these guys over here. The opacity was changed in the design menu. So you'll notice that this is white, that this is gray, but really what it is, if we go to the design menu here, it's just that this one is 100% opacity over here. And we're just double clicking to drill down into the individual elements. And this one right here is at 50. So what we're changing is the parameters. We're not changing the elements. All of the elements have to be available in all three for auto-animate to work. Okay. So, and basically this is just set up because we have three interactions that we want to hit. We basically want to make it so that when the user clicks on this button, it takes them here. When they click on this button, when they click on this button, it takes them here, and then vice versa. Okay. So let's go ahead and now that all of that's set up and everything's there, we're going to go ahead and start working on that. So what we want the user to do is to be able to click on this first element here. You'll notice I don't have the arrows, and that's because I'm not in the prototype mode. I'm in design mode, so I can switch to prototype. Now I have the arrow. Cool. So now I'm going to go ahead and click and drag this over to the artboard. And then under transition, I'm going to choose auto-animate. And then the destination is onboarding 2. You can choose ease in, ease out. A lot of people really like snap for this type of stuff. The general one is ease in, ease out, but we'll use snap here. And you can change the duration. Just for emphasis, we're going to go ahead and crank that up to 0.6 seconds. So let's go ahead and test that out. So if I click on this, you'll see it slides over to the next one here, which is super cool. But now that we're on the second board, we can't get back to the first one because we didn't add that interaction on the second board here. So if I double click on this element here in prototype mode and swing it back, just to connect it back, you'll see that it's already set to auto animate and it's already doing snap and it's already doing duration because XD's properties panel for the interactions is what's called sticky. It remembers the last thing you did. So we don't have to reset that. So all we have to do is hit this first one and it goes back. Cool. But what if I wanted to go to the third one on the first panel? Just double click, and then I will connect it here. And you can see all interactions that you do just by clicking on the artboard here. You can see everything that connects it. So basically, I have all three of those here. But if we go to the third one, I don't have these other two selected, so I have to connect those. So basically, it's just a bunch of, we're connecting wires. So if we go to Artboard 2 and come down here to this element, I'm going to double click. Let me zoom in a little bit more. And again, it's just showing these because they're hanging off and showing you that all the elements are there. I'm going to double click on this guy, move it over here. And then we'll see that both of those are set up. And I'll go to this guy and then drill down into that first guy right here. And I'm using the option, I'm using zoom in and pan pretty regularly here to kind of set up all of these interactions. And if I did that right, I should be able to hit any button on any of those and it'll kind of slide to it. And you'll see that kind of animation kind of like spring back to the snap. If we go really far, it has a little bit of recoil for us, which feels really natural when you're editing stuff. Cool. If this were attached to a main menu, I would want to go ahead and rig up this X right here to close this menu out. Like this is like an intro screen on an app. You've seen those before. This is what the app does. This is what else it can do. Let's get started. Those types of things. So you have all of that you can build in here, and auto animate can be used in a ton of different ways. Like if you were doing, because in Arizona right now, the Phoenix Suns are doing really well. I found that out the other day. I'm not a huge sports fan, but it's cool. I'll probably have to watch a game. If you guys can tell me when the next one is, that'd be great. But what we're going to do here is we're going to, so those are the clicking animations, right? And that's the auto animate. One thing that's way more common in digital interfaces, though, is this idea of dragging, especially on stuff that's touch screens. So to add a dragging animation, it's going to be the same thing, but our trigger is going to be drag instead of, we're still going to auto animate, but we're going to use the trigger, we're going to use a drag trigger instead of a click trigger. And you'll see that the click triggers are already set up between these two, but something that's way more natural on a digital screen will be to kind of like pull on it, right? So let's go ahead and set that up. So what we'll do is with our elements here, and this gets a little tricky, but we should be okay. So Suns play game 3. Nice, thank you. All right, cool. So we're gonna go ahead and go over to learn here because that's where we want to go, because that's what's here, right? We're gonna double click on this, and then we're gonna go to learn. We're gonna click and drag to connect it to this first one here. Notice that the blue box shows up. So even if these are overlapping, that's simply a visual indicator for you. Drag it to the panel you want it to live on, then drop. Okay, and you'll see these two kind of connect to the same thing, but they have two different ways. That's fine. So what we want to do is under trigger, and this is the first time we've changed the trigger here. We want to set that to drag. And then what that's going to allow us to do, I need to go over here and preview this page here. So I'll need to close my preview and then click on this drag and then open it. Now you'll notice that there is not only this element right here for us to click, because I mentioned before, users are going to have multiple ways to do stuff in ways that you would never expect. This UX designer clearly got feedback that I would just tap on the button and that I would drag. So to drag here, I'm going to go ahead and go to this first panel and click and drag over. So I can kind of pull it, hold it in the middle if I want, which is my favorite part. But I can drag that over and put it right where I want it. Cool. So in order to complete the loop per se, we need to set up the interaction going back. So on this drag to artboard, I'm going to double click. Again, we click first, it's just on the group. Double click to get to discover. Click and drag over. Or click and place, or however you do it. And that's going to set up your drag animation. So now, because this is live, and by the way, this is awesome. Like the live preview thing, like blew my mind when it came out. Just the ability to kind of make a change and see it happen right away. It's awesome. Then you can kind of go back and forth and see that that worked. And if we wanted to, we could set up a third one. I know we're getting short on time here though, so maybe I'll come back to it. But if I really wanted to set up a third one, I would, I'll switch to design here, and I'll option click and drag to create the third one. And I just give these space because it's a little bit easier when these things start to hang over a little bit. And then I will double click. I'll just click on this once, and then you'll see this is a draggable element. I'll hold down shift to make it so that I can only scroll one way, then use the guides to help me kind of center it up. And then drop that there. And the reason why it's awesome to just do this part is because all the elements are the same, which is what we need for auto animate. I'll need to go in here and adjust these. So if I wanted to adjust the opacity of this, because this is just an opacity adjustment, I happen to know that the adjustment is 50%. So under appearance, we'll find opacity here. We can click and drag on this slider. But we can also adjust this in increments of 10, which is, if I were doing this, I would use my keyboard here. 5 would be 50%, 1 would be 10%, 8 would be 80%. So I'm going to go ahead and tap 5 there to get to 50%. Go to this last element here, tap on this, and then 0 is 100%. Maybe. Maybe not. I can also just type in 100, which is what I'll do. Cool. And then I'll go to my design here. I'm just going to worry about the drag. I'm not going to worry about this part, but you guys, I guess we could. If we wanted to rig these up to kind of move between the different things, you would do that. And then I'm going to go ahead and set up the drag interaction here. And again, on the second panel, double click, go to the third one, click and drag. It's going to remember the last thing that we had, which is drag, which is awesome. I can come over here to 2. Oh, spacebar is a little sticky. All right, cool. Come back and do that. Cool. All right. And then we'll see how it looks. We'll go to preview. I can drag, I can drag, I can drag, and I can drag. So super cool. So now I can get that whole entire interaction done. It's just a little bit of practice. Thank you so much for hanging out, Jonathan. I appreciate it. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. So before we move on, how are we feeling about this? Do you feel like you have a little bit better feel of how XD works and how you can create those interactions? Does designing for a great question. Does designing for prototype for iPhone carry over to computer screen? A lot of what you do will. And then if you were designing for multiple screens, you could have different sizes kind of available to you. Like different elements have different things here. But yeah, I think a lot of them would. The thing you want to think about, like if you're designing for any screen, it's like, what's the interaction type going to be? And that's going to naturally adjust what you do. Like if you were on we'll talk about this in workshops next week, I think. If you were doing something for a website, you would want what are called hover states, so that when you hovered over something, it visually indicated that you might want to make a change. That doesn't really work well on a mobile screen because you have to tap. And at this point, like there's not a readily available like haptic engine or anything that kind of shows where you're hovering over. So yeah, it adjusts a little bit, but the principles are the same, if that makes sense. You just use, and we're not going to get into states here, but there's a whole entire thing about hover states and things that you can manipulate for desktop to make it make sense for that media. Does that make sense? Yeah. No, hover states are really cool. Some of my favorite stuff in XD. So we're hitting the last bit here. If we have time, we'll get to voice triggers, but overlays, voice triggers are really cool, but I think overlays are probably more useful more often. So we're going to talk about those. So when you create an overlay, what overlays do is they sit on top of pages here. They kind of sit on top and like allow you to access them. You don't. The nice thing about overlays is that we can create them as individual artboards, and you'll see that when I look at these artboards here, these have all kind of the same width, and then we have this mobile menu that we're going to use as an overlay here. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this, and it's going to kind of sit on top of each one of these guys right here. Usually you'll see overlays on mobile devices. I think if you go to Arizona.edu or most things, like if you're on a mobile device, there's a little hamburger menu here. This little guy's the hamburger. And then when we click on that, a menu pops up. And that's really what we're going to try and do. We want to use that menu on all of these different pages so that way we only have to rig it up once. We don't have to create 3 different menus to go to the same places. All right. So this will kind of be let's put together everything we've talked about into one application here. So we're going to start with the overlay, and then we'll kind of work to make this a more complete system. All right. So we're going to start with rigging up the overlay here. So it shows up on this first page. We're going to actually, I'll get rid of you for a second. Get a little bit wider so I can zoom in a little bit more. All right. So these things can be kind of hard to target. Be sure to watch your hovers here. Just click on that. If you're having a hard time getting to it, you can always use the layer panels here to kind of drill down and select stuff. So on this page here, it's called ICS-open, but this is pretty easy to hit. We're going to go ahead and click on this. Then we're going to drag it over to the overlay here. Now you need to remember it's going to do the last thing that we asked it to. So right now it's set up to a drag function. We don't want that. We want it to be a tap. And then under type, we want to switch to overlay here. Pay attention to what happens to this line when I do that. You'll see now it's a dotted line, and then we have this little green crosshair right here. So this dotted line is XD's indicator for an overlay. So this is on top of something. Like if you were on a website and you wanted to give somebody like click this to learn a little bit more, like that pop-up that says, hey, this is really great for this grill is really great for portable outdoor activities, because you can carry it wherever you want, that type of stuff. Like any sort of like pop out and then run away type of menu that you want here. This is probably a better example than what I gave. So this little X here shows you where this is going to land on the page. And you'll see that it is not as wide as the page here. When I click and drag, it gives me a little preview to show me where it's going to live. I'm going to go ahead and drag it all the way over to the left here. Cool. So now, if I go to my preview here, I can go and drag this back out because I like where that's at. If I click on this little hamburger menu, you'll see now that pops up. Now, these guys automatically have a hide feature whenever you click on something that's not supposed to be there or it runs away. You'll see that this 0.6 seconds is an eternity. That should happen way faster, and maybe it shouldn't dissolve. It should probably fly in or something like that. So let's go ahead and click on tap and adjust this in real time. I'm going to manipulate my window here just a little bit. Cool. I'm going to go ahead and choose under animation. I'm going to go ahead and have it slide right. And I'm going to go ahead and turn the easing on to snap. I'll make that point. I'll go 0.3 seconds. Well, 0.4, that's fine. Okay, cool. Now we'll test it out. Nice. That feels like something kind of sliding in. You're moving over a piece of paper. That feels like a good duration to me. If that's too slow for you, adjust it. Cool. So now we did all that work to rig that up. It's working great. Now we're going to go ahead and apply that to these other 2 things. So what we'll do first is we're going to go ahead and click on this little guy right here, our little hamburger, and the first one that we have all rigged up. We're going to go to edit and copy. You could do Command C if you wanted to. I just want to show you because the menus change based off what you do. I'm going to copy here, right? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the hamburger menu in the chair detail. And then I'm going to click on the hamburger menu in the sofa detail while holding the shift key. That allows me to select both of them. Then I'm going to go to edit, and then you'll see paste. I don't want to hit paste. Right under that, I want to it's Option or Alt Command V. I want to paste the interaction. So what that's going to do is it's going to take the interaction we just built and paste it across those two different things. So now all three of them go to the same place, which is awesome. Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and we'll test that out. Cool. So that takes us there. But I can't get to these other two areas to test them out because I haven't rigged that up yet. So if I go to this mobile menu here, click on chairs, then I'll just click and drag on chairs because it's an element that was put together, drag it over here. And then again, so remember what I did, and I don't want this to be an overlay on this overlay. I want this to be just a standard transition. So then I'll just have that dissolve in. 0.4 seconds is fine. Then I'll do the same thing with the sofas. Cool. All right, and I'll come back to this first guy here, and we'll try it out. Chairs takes me to the chair. Awesome. And then if I go down to here, sofas takes me to the sofas. Great. I don't really have a way to get back to that main menu though. And the cool thing about XD and like this type of work, and honestly most design work, is that it's iterative. You're not really going to, there's some things that you're going to like learn and adjust in the moment, and that's totally okay. So let's go ahead and do that here. We're going to go ahead and take this Altura icon here, and then in the menu, and then we're going to have that connect to this main one so that we have a way to get back. And then I'll do this with this little icon here too, because my user might be more inclined to hit this icon also. So I can just do the same thing. And now, once I do this, we'll test it out again. Cool. Take me to the chairs. Perfect. Tables. Don't have tables. And then Altura. Cool. Awesome. And then one thing I'll note here is if you're designing this as a prototype, your prototype doesn't have to have every interaction go to everything on every single page. If you're just trying to do proof of concept, having them set up so that they do the basic interactions that your user is going to use all the time. Like I really want my user to use this menu to select what they want to look at. They can just select chairs just to show that it goes to the chair section. Like, especially if you're at the beginning of it, you don't need to have like a fully functional prototype with every button doing everything. Prototyping doesn't necessarily have to be about that. It's about like, what are the core, a lot of it is about what are the core interactions that your user is going to use to do this. Now, if you're using a prototype like as a fully functional one, then you may want to take the time to kind of rig everything up. But if it's just I want to show you what this can do type of thing, it doesn't really, you don't really need to rig up every single thing. We've done usability testing in our offices before we've used XD, and like we've rigged up the interactions that we wanted them to go to, and we asked them to execute those actions. And like there are tons of things about usability testing. It's a really cool process, but we didn't rig up an entire like prototype of a website. We put together the website and kind of the core functions, and then we had them navigate those functions based off of asking them to complete tasks. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that like you don't need to be intimidated by building every piece of it. Core interactions is really what you want. So keep that in mind as you're kind of building. And if you wanted to do it like all the way till the end, that's awesome. But you don't have to, especially when you're trying to kind of show proof of concept. So don't let I have to rig up everything stop you from creating a prototype, because it doesn't necessarily need to be that way, especially if you're in early stages. Cool. So we covered a lot in design and prototyping. Does this all make sense more or less? Cool. Awesome. So now let's say that we've built the ultimate thing and we love it and we're ready to share it out. So let's talk about sharing real quick. So what we'll do is we will, a couple of different ways to go about it. But if we go to the share section here, what we'll want to do is we will select, it's going to go ahead and share this entire artboard with us. But if we just want to select a single thing to share, like if I just wanted to share this section here, I could go to the prototype menu, make this the home section, and make this it turns it into a flow, and I can have multiple flows. You'll see flow 1, flow 2. So when I hit home here, it's going to connect all of these together. So I'm just sharing this one piece here. So when I go to share, I can choose the flow that I want to share. This is great because it means that you can have, someone mentioned earlier, like what does desktop development look like? You can, because this is a vector-based program, you can have like your desktop, your mobile, and your tablet version of your website or application all in one file, which is great. So I'll choose the flow that I want to share, which is typically what I do if I have multiple workflows. So I'll just choose that flow, and then we'll create a link here. So you have a bunch of different options for links. There's design. There's a design review, which is great for, hey, check out these elements and tell me what you think about how the website works. And then there is, we'll get to development view in a second, but you have a presentation. You also have user testing. So this would be great if you, not everybody, you know, we're still kind of not able to be in front of each other all the time. So this is great. It just allows the user to see the app full screen and try things out as you're talking to them, which is awesome. But if I choose design review here, I can choose who I want to send it to. So I can either make it so that only invited people can see it, or I can put it behind a password. I'm going to choose anyone with a link. And then I'm going to hit create link. This will create a web link through Adobe XD. And I can copy this link here. Cool. There's also an embed. So like if you want to embed this on a website to be like, hey, this is a proof of concept or what have you, I'm going to go ahead and throw this link in the chat. You guys can tell me if it works. Cool. So I click on that and pull it up. Here is what the share side of it looks like. Maybe. Not sure what I did there. There we go. Ooh. Are any of you guys getting it, or is it doing that white flashy thing for you too? Okay, just me. I'm okay with that. Perfect. Okay. Well, we can figure that out later. Oh, it might not like Safari. Let's try Chrome. Duck. Cool. There we go. Cool. So this is what your user sees when you invite them to share. You can navigate either all of the panels here, or go with or choose the flow that you're working on. But they can scroll down. They can click. You can click on that interactable. It slides in. You can try it out and do that. Right. And the cool thing is you could add a comment here. So I can grab this little place a pin tool here. I can choose. Let me go ahead and back up. So if I go back to this first page, so you do this to get some feedback, right? So as you're working on this, I forgot to link up this part for the sofa. So let's say that I was a second person reviewing this. I could put a pin here and then say, make sure it links to the sofa page. Thanks. Cool. You can mention a specific user if you wanted to submit it, and then I'll get a notification that says that I have something to look at over here. And this feedback here, I always recommend when you're giving feedback, kind of like feedback anywhere else, actionable and specific is way more helpful than this is great or this isn't so great. So saying like, this is what I see, this is what we can do to fix it, or this is what I see, and this is how this makes me feel, which because we're talking about human-centered design, like how people feel and how it might make them feel is important to note. So keeping your feedback specific really helps kind of drive the conversation. Highly recommend that. So if I change this, so that's design review. If I change this to development review, I think this is really kind of where things get cool. You can allow, if you're sending this to a developer to work on to kind of create your app, because XD only prototypes it, and prototypes are great because they save a ton of time in, they can save a ton of time in development by showing the developer what you want before they ever touch it and being able to make changes quickly. But in this prototype, in this developer view here, hopefully I did the right thing. Maybe I didn't. Let me click on an element here. I don't think I did it. Development, share your design, update link. Update that link real quick. Sorry, it's thinking. But basically what this will allow you to do is your developer will not only be able to see your prototype, but if you allow them to, they'll also be able to download your assets, know what fonts you use, know what the spacing is for everything, know what colors you picked, all of that stuff that makes it way easier to start developing once you get going, and makes your prototype way more useful to someone who's developing for you, or if you're developing the website yourself or the app yourself. Let's reload that. Let's see what we get. Cool. So what you get is the specs mode here. If I click on specs, they'll be able to see every color that I have, all of those character styles that I used, what the interactions were and how long they took, what the viewport size is, what the design size is. So all of this is super useful to develop. They're also able to see kind of like your height, width of all the different elements, where they sit on the page, making it really easy for them to be able to start building what you prototyped, kind of putting that prototype into work and making that interaction, making those interactions real, using the stuff that they would use to program. I'm not a programmer, so I don't know all of the ins and outs and all the bits and bobs, but super cool. And it's available for them to download all of your assets as well, which is awesome. So those are the types of sharing that you can do inside of XD. Hopefully that makes sense. Last but not least, and by the way, if you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. We'll get to them right after this. I know that we're getting close to time. The last thing I want to show you is that you can invite people to work with you on a document, a kind of Google Docs style in XD, which is great if you have a team that's remote, or you have multiple people, or you found somebody who maybe wants to help you take a look at the project you're working on. I was working with a law student class who used XD to create a new prototype for handling small claims. And we used this feature all the time. So I save this as a cloud document to invite people to use it. And then call this workshop demo. June 2021, that's for me. Then I'll hit save. This will save it to your cloud storage through Adobe Creative Cloud if you have it. And then once it saves here, I can invite other users to kind of interact with it. So if I invited Alex over here to interact with it, he'd be able to dive in and help me edit this, which is super cool. It saves different design states and things like that. So if I type in, hope it's okay that I'm sharing your email, Alex. And then I can invite them. I can invite them to edit with an option there. Then he'll get the invitation, and then once he kind of gets in here, I'll be able to work on this document together and maybe use either like Zoom or Discord or however we want to communicate, or even just the phone to kind of work and talk together like we're in the same room working on the same document. Super cool. And I've had like 5 or 6 people working on the document at a given time, but this is this is kind of built to have multiple people looking at and working with it all together. So often these UX and UI designing UX tends to take more than one person to do, or can, I should say. I shouldn't say tens, but for big projects where you have people who are creating the content and things like that. Ooh, I'm spinning. Maybe that's him joining. Hopefully you guys can still hear me. But that's the other thing that you can do here. And it's a really cool collaborative process once it kind of gets going. But that's basically what the workshop was.